The water from Rosa Valmont's well came up brown that September morning in 1882, thick with sediment and reeking of something chemical that made her stomach turn even before she brought the bucket to her nose. She had seen enough trouble in her 24 years to recognize sabotage when it stared her in the face, and this was deliberate as a bullet with her name carved into it. Her small cattle ranch sat on some of the best grazing land outside Marfa, Texas, which made it valuable, and value in the desert made men do terrible things. Rosa dumped the bucket and watched the poisoned water seep into the dry earth, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She had spent 3 years building this place from nothing after her father died. 3 years proving she could run cattle as well as any man in Jeff Davis County. The ranch house was small but sturdy, the barn kept the summer storms out, and her 60 head of cattle were healthy and fat on the grassland that stretched toward the mountains. Now someone wanted to drive her out, and she had a fair idea who. Marcus Thorne owned the sprawling ranch to her east, thousands of acres that his father had claimed during the land rush. He had been sniffing around her property since spring, making offers that started polite and grew more insistent with each rejection. The last time he visited, just 2 weeks ago, his smile had held an edge sharp enough to draw blood when he told her a woman alone had no business trying to manage land that a real rancher could put to proper use. She had shown him off her property with her father's Winchester in her hands and fire in her voice, and apparently he had taken that personally. She walked the perimeter of the well, examining the ground for tracks. The earth was scuffed, boot prints layered over each other in the dust, but nothing clear enough to prove anything to Sheriff Morrison, who played cards with Thorne every Saturday night. Rosa kicked at a small glass bottle half buried near the well's stone rim, and when she picked it up, the label read "Concentrated Lye Solution" in faded print. Evidence enough for her, but not for a lawman in Thorne's pocket. Her nearest neighbor was Zachary Quinn, whose ranch lay 3 miles west along the creek that ran behind both properties during the wet season. The creek was dry now, reduced to scattered pools that would vanish by October if the rains did not come. Quinn kept to himself mostly, a man in his late 20s who had drifted into Marfa 5 years back and bought his land with cash money that set tongues wagging about where it came from. Rosa had spoken to him perhaps a dozen times total, brief exchanges at the general store or passing words when their cattle mingled at the property line. He struck her as decent enough, quiet and serious with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that noticed more than he said. She filled 2 buckets from the well despite the contamination and carried them away from the house to dump in a far corner of her land where nothing grew anyway. It took 6 trips before the well ran mostly dry, and by then her arms burned and sweat soaked through her dress. The sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day, and she had 16 cattle in her near pasture that would need water by evening. Her rain barrels held perhaps 20 gallons total, enough for the house but not the livestock. Pride told her to solve this alone, the way she solved everything since her father's heart gave out while mending fence on a summer afternoon 3 years past. But cattle could not wait on pride, and she knew exactly how long animals could last in this heat without water. 2 days if they were lucky, less if the temperature spiked. The well would need cleaning and testing, which meant hauling out the contaminated water and sediment, then waiting to see if whatever poison Thorne used had soaked into the aquifer itself. That could take a week, maybe more. Rosa changed into her riding clothes and saddled her mare, a sturdy sorrel named Penny who had been her father's favorite. The ride to Quinn's ranch took 40 minutes across land that shimmered with heat, the mountains in the distance wavering like they might dissolve into the sky. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would ask without sounding desperate, but the words felt clumsy in her mind. Asking for help stuck in her throat like a fish bone. Quinn's property appeared better maintained than her own, which stung her pride even as she admitted he probably had more capital to work with. The barn stood freshly painted, the corral fences straight and strong, and she counted at least 80 head of cattle grazing on the hillside. His house was modest but neat, with a covered porch that would provide decent shade in the afternoon. He emerged from the barn as she rode up, wiping his hands on a rag and squinting against the sun. He wore work clothes dusty from morning labor, and his hat was pushed back on his head. When he recognized her, surprise flickered across his face before settling into something more guarded. "Miss Valmont," he said, his voice carrying that slight drawl common to men who had spent time in both Texas and farther south. "Something wrong?" She dismounted and wrapped Penny's reins around the porch rail, buying herself a moment to swallow her pride. "My well's been poisoned. I found lye solution dumped in it this morning. The water is not fit for anything, and I have 16 head in my near pasture that will need drinking water by tonight." His expression went hard and flat. "Poisoned? You are certain?" Found the bottle by the well. Water came up brown and reeking. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away or seem weak. "I am not here to beg, Mr. Quinn. I am asking if I can pay you for water until I can get my well cleaned and tested. I can bring my own barrels, haul it myself. I just need access to your creek." "Creek is down to pools barely deep enough to wet your ankles," he said, but he was already thinking. She could see it in the way his gaze went distant and calculating. "You would spend all day hauling enough for 16 head, and that is assuming the pools hold. Most of my water comes from my well now. Then I will pay for well water. Name your price." He shook his head slowly, not in refusal but in something that looked almost like disappointment. "You think I would charge you for water when someone poisoned your well? What kind of man would that make me?" The response caught her off guard, and she felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the sun. "I do not take charity, Mr. Quinn. Not offering charity, offering what anyone decent would offer when their neighbor has trouble." He glanced toward the barn, then back to her. "I have a water wagon I use for the far pastures. Holds about 50 gallons. You can take it daily, fill it from my well, and bring it back when you are done for the day. That should handle your near pasture until we figure out what to do about your well." The word came out sharper than she intended. "A poisoned well is serious business, Miss Valmont. Cleaning it properly takes more than one person, and testing the aquifer means someone needs to go down in the well itself to scrub the sides and bottom. You planning to do that alone?" She had been, actually, though the thought of descending into that narrow darkness made her skin crawl. Her father had cleaned the well twice during her childhood, and she remembered him coming up pale and shaking, talking about how the walls seemed to press in, and the circle of sky above looked small as a coin. "I can manage," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Maybe so, but why should you when I am offering to help?" He stepped off the porch and gestured toward the barn. "Come on, I will show you where the wagon is. You can take it now. Get your cattle watered before the day gets any hotter." She followed him into the barn's relative coolness, breathing in the familiar sense of hay and leather and animal warmth. The water wagon sat near the back, a sturdy flatbed affair with a large barrel mounted on it and a spigot near the bottom. It was well made and clearly maintained, the wood oiled against the dry air. "I usually hitch it to my draft horse, but your mare looks strong enough to pull it empty," Quinn said. "Fill it here, take it to your place and bring it back when you are finished. Tomorrow morning you can do the same." "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Suspicion and gratitude tangled up in her chest until she could not tell which was stronger. He met her eyes, and his own were serious and steady. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it, and I learned that is how decent people ought to act. And because, if Marcus Thorne poisoned your well, he is going to try other things, and you should not have to face that alone." The name hung between them, confirmation that Quinn knew exactly who was behind this. Rosa felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of isolation unwinding slightly. "You think it was Thorne?" "I know it was. He has been buying up land around Marfa for 2 years, always the same pattern. Make an offer, get refused, then problems start. Fence wire cut, water sources fouled, cattle spooked in the night. Most folks eventually sell because it is easier than fighting. But you have not sold, which means he is escalating. How do you know all this?" Quinn's mouth twisted in something too bitter to be called a smile. "Because he tried it with me last year. Offered to buy my ranch at half what it was worth, got angry when I refused. Next week my barn caught fire in the night, lost 3 horses before I got them out. I heard about that fire. Folks said it was an accident. Folks say a lot of things, especially when the man starting fires is rich and influential." He moved to the front of the wagon and began hitching it to a sturdy draft horse that stood placidly in a nearby stall. "Point is, I know what you are up against, and I know it is not something you should face alone." Rosa watched him work, the efficient movements of someone who had done this task 1,000 times. Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle everything herself, but the practical side of her nature recognized that would be foolish. She needed water for her cattle, and she needed help cleaning the well. Pride would not keep her animals alive or her ranch running. "All right," she said quietly. "I accept your help, but I am still paying you back somehow. Labor, money, something. I do not want to be in anyone's debt." "Fair enough. We will figure out terms later." He finished with the hitching and led the horse and wagon outside into the sunlight. "Let me fill the barrel for you, then you can head back." It took 20 minutes to fill the barrel from his well using a pump that worked smooth and easy. Rosa felt a spike of envy at how clear and cold his water ran, no hint of contamination or sediment. When the barrel was full, Quinn secured the top and checked the hitching one more time. "You need help getting it to your place?" he asked. "I can manage the drive. It is a straight shot." "All right. When you are done watering your cattle, bring the wagon back and leave it by the barn. Tomorrow morning, come by whenever you need it. I am usually up by dawn." She nodded, gathering Penny's reins and preparing to tie her to the wagon. Quinn stopped her with a hand on her arm, light and brief but enough to make her pause. "Miss Valmont, be careful. If Thorne poisoned your well, he is watching to see what you do next. Do not give him an excuse to escalate further." "What do you suggest? Should I just let him run me off my own land?" "No, but be smart about how you fight back. Document everything, keep your rifle close, and do not go anywhere alone if you can help it." His eyes were serious, and she realized he was genuinely worried. Men like Thorne think women are easy targets. Prove him wrong, but do it in a way that keeps you alive. The words sent a chill through her despite the heat. She had known Thorne was dangerous in an abstract way, but hearing Quinn say it so plainly made it real. This was not just about property or pride anymore. This was about survival. "I will be careful," she said, and meant it. The ride back to her ranch took longer with the wagon, and she spent the time thinking about Quinn's warnings and wondering what Thorne would try next. When she reached her property, she drove the wagon directly to the near pasture where her cattle had gathered in whatever shade they could find. They came eagerly when she opened the spigot, crowding around the stream of water with desperate thirst that made her anger burn hotter. They had gone nearly 24 hours without water in killing heat, because of one man's greed. It took all 50 gallons to properly water the 16 animals, and she made mental notes about bringing more tomorrow. The rest of her herd was in the far pasture where the creek pools still held a little water, but those would dry up soon. She would need to consolidate her cattle, bring them all closer to where she could reach them with the wagon. She returned the wagon to Quinn's barn as instructed, leaving it beside the well with a brief note of thanks weighted down with a rock. The ride home as the sun began its descent toward the mountains felt longer, her body aching from the day's labor and her mind churning with plans and worries. That night, she slept with her father's Winchester beside the bed and woke twice to sounds that turned out to be wind in the eaves. When dawn broke, she was already dressed and ready, her hair braided back and her resolve hardened by a night of light sleep and determined thinking. The ride to Quinn's ranch became routine over the next 3 days. Each morning she would arrive just after dawn, find the wagon waiting with the barrel already filled, and see Quinn somewhere nearby working on his own morning tasks. They spoke little at first, just brief greetings and updates, but on the 4th day, he stopped her as she was preparing to leave. "I have been thinking about your well," he said without preamble. "It needs to be cleaned soon, before whatever is in there soaks deeper into the aquifer. If you are willing, I can come over this afternoon and we can start the work. You do not have to do that. You have your own ranch to run. And you have been riding 6 miles every morning to keep your cattle alive. Seems to me the faster we fix your well, the better for both of us." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Unless you would rather I stay away. Some folks prefer to handle their troubles privately." She thought about going down into that dark well alone, about trying to haul buckets of contaminated water and scrub stone walls while perched on a rope ladder. Thought about what would happen if she fell or got stuck, or if the well collapsed. Pride was one thing, but stupidity was another. "This afternoon would be fine," she said. "I appreciate the help." He nodded, something that might have been approval flickering across his face. "I will bring tools and rope. We will need to lower buckets and brushes, maybe some fresh lime if the contamination is bad enough. Could take a few days of work." "A few days." The words came out sharper than intended, frustration bleeding through her careful control. "A well is not something you rush. Do it wrong and you could make the contamination worse or weaken the walls. Do it right and you have clean water for years." His tone was patient but firm. "I know it is hard being dependent on help, but some things just take time." He was right, which only made her frustration burn hotter, but she swallowed it and nodded, forcing herself to be practical. "All right. This afternoon, then." Quinn arrived at her ranch 3 hours later driving a wagon loaded with tools, rope, buckets, brushes with long handles, and several bags of lime. He also brought 2 lanterns and a thick leather harness that looked like it was designed to hold a person safely while suspended. "You have done this before," Rosa observed as he unloaded the equipment near her well. "A few times. My first ranch was in Oklahoma, and the well there had problems every spring when the runoff came. Learned real quick how to clean one properly." He examined her well's stone rim, then peered down into the darkness. "How deep is it?" "About 30 feet. My father had it dug the year before he died." "Not too deep then. That is good." He straightened and looked at her seriously. "Here is how this works. One person goes down on the harness, buckets up the contaminated water and scrubs the walls. Other person stays up top, manages the rope, hauls up the buckets, and makes sure nothing goes wrong. The person down below has to trust the person up top completely because your life is literally in their hands." The weight of that statement settled between them. Rosa looked at the rope and harness, then at Quinn's steady, serious face. "You have more experience with this. You should go down." I am also stronger, which means I can haul buckets up faster. Makes more sense for me to be topside." He paused, then added carefully, "But if you are not comfortable with that, I can go down. Your choice." She thought about it, weighing practicality against an instinctive wariness of depending so completely on someone she barely knew. But every interaction with Quinn so far had proven him reliable and honest. He had shared his water without question, offered help without asking for anything in return, and treated her with respect that many men in Marfa failed to show. "You stay up top," she decided, "but you better not drop me." A hint of a smile touched his mouth, the first real expression of warmth she had seen from him. "I promise to keep you alive, Miss Valmont. If I am going to trust you with my life, you might as well call me Rosa." "Rosa, then. And you can call me Zachary or Zach, most people do." They spent the next hour setting up the equipment. Zachary secured the rope to the well's winch and tested the harness thoroughly before helping Rosa into it. The leather straps fit snugly around her thighs and waist, distributing weight in a way that felt secure even though the whole contraption made her nervous. "I will lower you slowly," Zachary explained, demonstrating how the rope fed through the winch mechanism. "You call up if you need to stop or if there is a problem. When you fill a bucket, give 2 tugs on the rope and I will haul it up. 3 tugs means you are ready to come up yourself. Understood?" "Understood." He lit one of the lanterns and attached it to her harness, then handed her a long-handled brush and a bucket. "Ready?" Rosa took a breath and positioned herself at the well's edge. Looking down into that narrow shaft of darkness made her stomach tighten, but she forced herself to nod. "Ready." The descent was slow and nerve-wracking. The well walls pressed close on all sides, rough stone that scraped her shoulders when she did not hold herself carefully centered. The circle of light above grew smaller as she descended, and the lantern's glow illuminated slimy walls and dark water below that looked thick and foul. When her feet touched the water level, she called up, "I am at the bottom." Zachary's voice echoed down, strangely distorted by the stone. "How does it look?" "Bad. The walls are coated with residue and the water is cloudy. I can see sediment on the bottom." "Start with the walls, then work down to the sediment. Take your time." She began scrubbing, the brush making harsh scraping sounds against stone. Brown and gray residue came away in thick patches, falling into the water below and making it even murkier. Her arms burned from holding the brush at awkward angles, and the smell of chemicals and stagnant water made her eyes water. When the first bucket was full of contaminated water and debris, she tugged the rope twice and waited while Zachary hauled it up. Time lost meaning in that dark, narrow space. She scrubbed until her arms shook, filled buckets until she lost count, and slowly worked her way around the circular walls. The harness kept her secure, but the position was exhausting, and several times she had to rest, just hanging in the darkness and listening to the distant sounds of Zachary moving above. "How are you doing?" His voice called down after what might have been an hour or 3. "Tired, but fine. I am maybe halfway done with the walls. You have been down there over 2 hours. Time to come up for a break." She wanted to argue to push through and finish, but her body was shaking with fatigue and the air in the well felt thick and hard to breathe. "All right, 3 tugs." The ascent was slower than the descent, and when she finally emerged into the sunlight, she gasped at the brightness and clean air. Zachary helped her out of the harness, his hands steady and impersonal, and she nearly fell when her legs proved unsteady beneath her. "Easy," he said, gripping her arm to keep her upright. "You need water and rest. Well cleaning is hard work." He had set up a shaded area near the well using a tarp stretched between posts, and he guided her there before bringing water from his wagon. Rosa drank deeply, the clean, cold taste of it almost painful after breathing chemical residue for 2 hours. "You did good work," Zachary said, settling nearby on an overturned bucket. "I hauled up 18 buckets of contaminated water. At this rate, we should have the well cleaned in 3 or 4 days. 3 or 4 days. She looked at him in dismay. "I cannot ask you to spend that much time away from your own ranch." "You did not ask," I offered, "and my ranch will survive. I have a hired man who comes 3 days a week to help with the heavy work. He can handle things while I am here." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides, I do not like the idea of you doing this alone. What if you got hurt and there was no one to pull you up?" The thought had occurred to her during those dark hours below ground, but she had pushed it aside. Now, sitting in the shade with fatigue making her bones feel liquid, she acknowledged how foolish it would have been to attempt this alone. "Thank you," she said simply, "for all of this. The water, the help, everything. You do not need to thank me every time. We are neighbors, and neighbors help each other. That is how it should be." They rested for 30 minutes before Rosa declared herself ready to go back down. Zachary looked skeptical but helped her into the harness without argument. The second session was harder than the first, her arms already fatigued and her body protesting the cramped position. But she worked steadily, scrubbing walls and filling buckets, determined to make real progress. When she finally emerged as the sun was setting, she could barely climb out of the harness. Zachary had to half lift her out of the well, and she leaned against him for a moment before finding her balance. "You pushed too hard," he said, but there was no judgment in his voice, just observation. "Tomorrow we start earlier and take more breaks." "Tomorrow?" She blinked at him in the fading light. "I told you, this is a 3 or 4 day job. I will be back at dawn. You should eat something and get rest. Well, cleaning takes more out of you than you expect." He packed up most of the equipment but left the rope and harness rigged for the next day. Rosa walked him to his wagon on unsteady legs, her entire body one large ache. "Zachary," she said as he climbed onto the wagon seat, "why are you really doing this? And do not say it is just about being neighborly. You barely know me." He gathered the reins and looked down at her, his expression hard to read in the twilight. "Maybe I see someone fighting to keep what is theirs, and I respect that. Maybe I am tired of watching Marcus Thorne run roughshod over decent people. Or maybe I just think a woman who has been hauling water 6 miles every day for her cattle deserves someone in her corner." He clicked his tongue to the horse. "Get some rest, Rosa. Tomorrow will be another long day." She watched him drive away until the darkness swallowed him, then trudged to her house on legs that felt like lead. She meant to make dinner, but fell asleep at the kitchen table still in her dirty work clothes, and woke hours later to stumble into bed properly. Zachary returned at dawn as promised, and they fell into a rhythm. She would descend into the well and work for an hour or two, then come up to rest while he hauled water for her cattle using his wagon. They would eat a quick meal, simple food she prepared, and then she would go back down to continue the work. The well walls slowly came clean, revealing pale stone beneath the contamination, and the water at the bottom began to look less murky. On the third day, as she was scrubbing near the bottom of the well, her brush struck something hard buried in the sediment. She reached down carefully and pulled up another bottle, this one empty but clearly labeled with the same lye solution brand as the first. "Zachary," she called up. "I found something." "What is it?" "Another bottle, same as the one by the rim. He must have dumped several bottles down here." The rope went taut and she was hauled up quickly. When she emerged, Zachary was standing at the well's edge with an expression of cold fury that transformed his normally calm face into something dangerous. "Let me see it," he said, and she handed over the bottle. He turned it in his hands, examining the label. "This is evidence." Direct proof the poisoning was deliberate. Evidence the sheriff will ignore because Marcus Thorne plays cards with him every Saturday. Maybe, but there are other authorities, federal marshals, territorial judges. If we document this properly, it becomes harder for Thorne to hide behind local connections. He looked at her seriously. Are you willing to fight this legally? Because once we start down that road, there is no backing out. Rosa thought about the past 3 days, the backbreaking work and the constant fear of what Thorne might do next. Thought about her father building this ranch with his own hands and dying to keep it running. Thought about giving up and letting a bully win simply because fighting back was hard. I am willing to fight, she said firmly. Whatever it takes. Something shifted in Zachary's expression, respect and something warmer bleeding through his usual reserve. Then we see this through together, but first we finish cleaning your well. They worked until sunset, and by the time they stopped, the well walls were completely scrubbed and most of the contaminated sediment was hauled out. The water level was low, but Zachary explained that was normal after cleaning. The aquifer will refill it over the next day or two, he said as they packed away the equipment. We let it sit tonight, then tomorrow we test the water. If it comes up clean, we treat it with fresh lime to neutralize any remaining contamination, then test again. If it is still good after that, you should be safe to use it. And if it is not clean, then we try other solutions, but let's not borrow trouble before we know there is any. That night, Rosa slept deeply despite her exhaustion, some part of her mind finally allowing rest now that the worst of the work was done. She woke before dawn and was dressed and ready when Zachary arrived with his wagon. They hauled up fresh water from the well and examined it carefully in the morning light. It ran clear with no chemical smell, no discoloration, no hint of contamination. Rosa felt something loosen in her chest, hope she had been afraid to feel. Looks good, Zachary said, sniffing the water cautiously. But we still need to test it properly. I will take a sample to the assayer in Marfa. He can tell us if there are any chemicals remaining. That will take hours. Then I suggest you spend those hours resting instead of worrying. He poured the water sample into a clean bottle and corked it carefully. I will be back this afternoon. If you need anything, stay near the house. Do not go wandering alone. The warning in his voice made her frown. You think Thorne will try something else? I think he is not stupid and he knows you have not left yet. That means he will escalate. Zachary secured the bottle in his wagon. Just be careful, Rosa, please. She nodded and he drove away toward town. Rosa spent the morning doing small tasks around the ranch, mending harnesses and oiling tools, things she had neglected during the crisis with the well. She kept her rifle close and jumped at every sound, her nerves stretched tight with waiting. Zachary returned in the late afternoon, and she knew from his expression before he spoke that the news was good. Water is clean, he said, genuine smile transforming his face. No lie, no chemicals, nothing harmful. The assayer said it is some of the best well water he has tested in months. Rosa felt tears prick her eyes and turned away quickly to hide them. Relief hit her like a physical blow, weeks of tension draining away all at once. She heard Zachary climb down from the wagon and felt him approach, his boots crunching in the dry earth. Hey, he said softly. It is all right. You are allowed to be relieved. I do not cry, she said fiercely, scrubbing at her eyes with the back of her hand. I have not cried since my father died. Maybe that is too long then. His hand touched her shoulder, light and careful. You have been holding everything together alone for 3 years, Rosa. That is more than most people could manage. You do not have to be strong every single moment. The gentleness in his voice broke something inside her, and she turned into his shoulder without planning to. letting herself lean on someone else for the first time in memory. He went still for a heartbeat, then wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she was something precious that might break. He smelled like sun-warmed cotton and leather and clean sweat, and his heartbeat was steady against her ear. "It has been so hard," she whispered into his shirt. "Every day something breaks or goes wrong and I fix it alone. I am so tired of being alone." "You are not alone anymore," he said, and she felt the words rumble in his chest. "I am here and I am not going anywhere." They stood like that for a long moment, and Rosa felt something fundamental shift between them. This was not just a neighbor helping anymore, not just common courtesy or frontier decency. This was personal and real, and it terrified her as much as it drew her. She pulled back slowly, wiping her eyes and trying to reassemble her composure. Zachary let her go but stayed close, his eyes dark and serious. "We should celebrate," he said. "Your well is fixed, your cattle are safe, and you did not let Thorn run you off. That deserves recognition. I cannot take all the credit. You did most of the work. We did it together, which is even better." He glanced at the sun, still a few hours from setting. "Let me finish treating the well with lime, then come have dinner at my place. A proper meal, not just whatever you have been cobbling together. I should not impose further." "Rosa, you could not impose if you tried. Besides, I am a decent cook when I make the effort, and I suspect you have been living on bread and bacon for days." He was right, which made her smile despite her lingering embarrassment at crying. "All right, dinner at your place, but only if you let me help cook." They treated the well with fresh lime, a process that took less than an hour, then let it sit to finish purifying. Zachary declared the work complete and loaded his tools into the wagon while Rosa changed into a clean dress, suddenly self-conscious about appearing at his home in her work clothes. The ride to his ranch felt different now, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. She kept stealing glances at him as he drove, noticing details she had missed before. The way his hands held the reins with unconscious competence, the line of his jaw, the way the late afternoon sun turned his dark hair almost bronze. When he caught her looking, he smiled, and she felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the weather. His house was tidy inside, sparsely furnished but clean and well kept. He had her sit at the kitchen table while he built up the fire in the stove and began pulling out ingredients for dinner. She watched him work, comfortable in his own space, and felt something warm unfold in her chest. "How did you learn to cook?" she asked. "Necessity mostly. When you live alone, you either learn or starve." He cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced ease. "My mother taught me the basics before I left home, said any man who expected a woman to do all the cooking was not worth marrying. That stuck with me." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was. Died when I was 20, pneumonia one winter that just would not break." His voice went quiet with old grief. "My father followed her 6 months later. Some people say it was his heart, but I think he just could not bear to be without her. I am sorry." Losing both parents close together must have been terrible. It was, but it also taught me something about love. They were partners, real ones. They worked together, supported each other, made decisions as a team. That is what I want if I ever marry. Not someone to cook and clean for me, but someone to build a life with." He glanced at her, and there was something searching in his eyes. "You understand that, I think, building something meaningful." "I do. My parents were like that too. When my mother died giving birth to a stillborn son, my father was never quite the same. But he kept going because he had me to raise and a ranch to run. He taught me everything, treated me like the son he wanted. Some people thought that was strange, a girl learning to rope and brand and fix fences. But he said competence mattered more than propriety. He was right. Zachary began cooking, the smell of eggs and bacon filling the kitchen. And he raised a daughter who could run a ranch alone, which is more than most people accomplish in a lifetime. They talked while he cooked, conversation flowing easier now that some barrier between them had crumbled. She learned he had been a soldier briefly after his parents died, served 2 years before realizing military life was not for him. He had drifted west looking for a place that felt like home, worked as a hired hand on various ranches, and saved every penny until he could buy his own land. "Why Marfa?" she asked. "The land spoke to me. Mountains in the distance, big sky, room to breathe. And it was far enough from my past that I could start fresh." He plated the food and set it before her, then took the seat across. "What about you? Ever think about leaving? Every time something breaks or goes wrong." She took a bite of eggs, surprised at how good they were. "But this land is in my blood. My father is buried on a hill overlooking the east pasture. I cannot just walk away from that." "Then you stay and fight, which is exactly what you have been doing." They ate and talked as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Rosa could not remember the last time she had felt this comfortable with another person, this sense of being truly understood. When dinner was finished, she helped him clean the dishes despite his protests, and they worked side by side in companionable silence. "I should get home before it gets full dark," she said finally, though part of her wanted to stay longer. "Let me drive you. Your mare can be tied to the wagon, and I will feel better knowing you got home safe." She wanted to argue that she could manage, but the truth was the ride back alone in darkness did not appeal. "All right. Thank you." The drive back was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached her ranch, Zachary helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Tomorrow I will bring more water," he said. "Just until you are certain your well is completely safe to use. You have done so much already. And I am happy to do more." He looked at her in the darkness, his expression hard to read. "I care about what happens to you, Rosa. I hope you know that." Her heart beat faster and she felt the pull of him like gravity. "I know, and I care about you too." He smiled, slow and genuine, then climbed back onto the wagon. She watched him drive away with one hand pressed to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. That night she dreamed of strong hands and dark eyes, of building something permanent with someone who saw her as an equal. When she woke, the dream lingered like a promise. The next morning Rosa tested her well water carefully before drinking, but it came up clean and cold with no hint of contamination. Relief flooded through her, and she celebrated by taking a proper bath for the first time in days, scrubbing away the grime and exhaustion of the past week. She was hanging laundry when she saw the dust plume on the horizon, a rider coming fast from the direction of town. Her instinct screamed warning, and she ducked inside to grab her rifle before the rider got close enough to identify. It was Marcus Thorne, mounted on a flashy paint horse and wearing his expensive clothes like armor. He reined up outside her property line and sat there looking at her house with an expression of barely concealed fury. Rosa stepped onto her porch with the rifle cradled in her arms, not pointing it but making its presence clear. "You are not welcome here, Thorne. Turn around and leave." "I am on public land, Miss Valmont. I have every right to be here." His voice was cold and sharp. "I heard you had trouble with your well. Such a shame. These things happen to ranches that are not properly maintained." "Funny you should mention that, since I found 2 bottles of lye solution in my well. The same brand sold at the general store, where I am sure the clerk would remember who bought several bottles recently." His expression went flat and dangerous. "Careful making accusations you cannot prove, Miss Valmont. A woman alone should not go around slandering prominent citizens. I am not alone anymore, and I have evidence, including witness testimony about your pattern of running off neighbors who refuse to sell to you." She raised her chin, refusing to show fear even though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You are not going to scare me off my land, Thorne. I am here to stay, and if you try anything else, I will take it to the federal marshal." The marshal is not going to care about one woman's complaints against a respected rancher. But there was uncertainty in his voice now, a crack in his confidence. Maybe not, but he might care about a pattern of sabotage and intimidation that crosses onto federal land management issues. Especially when that woman has a neighbor willing to testify to similar harassment, complete with evidence of arson. She let that sink in. "You made a mistake poisoning my well, Thorne. You gave me grounds to fight back legally, and I intend to use them." He stared at her for a long moment, rage and calculation warring in his expression. Finally, he spat into the dust. "This is not over, Miss Valmont. No, it is not, but the next move you make against me will be the last one you can deny. Remember that." He yanked his horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the still air. Rosa stood on her porch until he disappeared from sight, then went inside on shaking legs and sat down hard at her kitchen table. She had just declared war on the most powerful man in the county, and there would be consequences. But she had also stood her ground and made him back down, which felt like a victory even if it was a small one. Zachary arrived an hour later with his water wagon and took one look at her face before asking what happened. She told him about Thorne's visit and the confrontation, and watched his expression go hard and cold. "He is testing you, seeing if you will break under pressure," he said grimly. "We need to move fast with the legal case before he tries something worse." "How do we do that? The sheriff will not help, and I do not know how to contact a federal marshal." "I do. There is a marshal named Clayton who comes through Marfa every few months, handles disputes that cross territorial boundaries. He is due back next week according to the telegraph office." Zachary paced her kitchen like a caged animal. "In the meantime, we document everything. Write down dates, times, what was said and done. Gather the lie bottles as physical evidence, and you do not stay here alone anymore." "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting you stay at my ranch until the marshal arrives. It is safer, and Thorne will think twice about pulling anything if he knows you are not isolated." Rosa wanted to refuse on principle, to insist she could defend her own property. But she remembered the look in Thorne's eyes, the barely restrained violence, and knew Zachary was right. Pride was not worth dying over. "For a week only," she said. "Just until the marshal comes, and I help with your ranch work in exchange for room and board." "Agreed. Pack what you need and we will move your cattle to my pastures temporarily. They will be safer there anyway." They spent the rest of the day consolidating resources. Rosa packed clothes and important documents while Zachary helped move her cattle. By sunset, her entire herd was grazing peacefully on his land, mixed with his own animals, and she was settled in his small guest room with her belongings stacked neatly in the corner. Sharing a house with Zachary felt strange and intimate in ways Rosa had not anticipated. They were careful to maintain propriety, never alone in rooms with closed doors, but the domesticity of eating meals together and sharing evening conversation created an illusion of permanence that both comforted and frightened her. On the third night, as they sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, Zachary said quietly, "You could stay here permanently if you wanted, combine our ranches, run them as a single operation. It would be safer and more efficient." Rosa's heart skipped. "Are you proposing a business arrangement?" "I am proposing whatever you are comfortable with. a business partnership if that is all you want, or something more if you feel the same way I do." He looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting starlight. "I have grown to care for you these past weeks, Rosa, more than just neighborly concern. You are strong and capable, and you do not back down from a fight. Those are qualities I admire. But you are also kind and thoughtful, and you make me laugh, which I did not expect to do again after losing my parents. I would be honored to build a life with you, in whatever form you are willing to accept." Her breath caught, emotions swirling too fast to name. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to accept the safety and partnership he offered. But another part hesitated, afraid of losing her independence, of being swallowed by someone else's life. "I care for you too," she said slowly. "More than I expected to. But I need to know this is real and not just born from crisis and proximity. When the trouble with Thorn is resolved, when things are calm again, ask me then. If you still feel the same, I promise to give you a real answer." He nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. "That is fair. I can wait." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Rosa let herself imagine what a future with Zachary might look like. Combined ranches and shared work, evenings on this porch talking about their days, building something lasting together. The image felt right in a way that terrified her with its intensity. The marshal arrived in Marfa 6 days later, and Rosa and Zachary met him at the sheriff's office, despite Sheriff Morrison's obvious displeasure. Marshal Clayton was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for fairness that crossed territorial boundaries. They presented their evidence and testimony, the lie bottles and written documentation of Thorn's harassment pattern. The marshal listened carefully, asking pointed questions, and Rosa saw Sheriff Morrison's face go red with suppressed anger. "These are serious allegations," Marshal Clayton said when they finished, "and the physical evidence is compelling. I will need to interview Mr. Thorn and any witnesses, which will take a few days. In the meantime, I am issuing a formal order prohibiting Mr. Thorn from approaching either of your properties or making contact with either of you except through legal counsel." "Marcus Thorn is a respected member of this community," Sheriff Morrison protested. "You cannot just take the word of 2 ranchers with a grudge." "I can when the evidence supports their claims, Sheriff, and I suggest you remember that federal law supersedes local preferences." The marshal's tone was mild but carried an edge of steel. "If I find you have been derelict in your duties regarding this matter, we will have a separate conversation about your fitness for office." The sheriff subsided, glaring at Rosa with open hostility. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. The investigation took 4 days, during which Rosa and Zachary stayed at his ranch and waited anxiously for news. On the morning of the 5th day, the marshal came to them with results. "I have interviewed 6 other ranchers in the area, all of whom reported similar harassment from Marcus Thorn after refusing his purchase offers," Marshal Clayton said grimly. "Combined with your evidence and the testimony of the general store clerk, who sold Thorn 3 bottles of lye solution 2 days before your well was poisoned, I have enough to bring formal charges. Thorn will face trial for sabotage, harassment, and attempted fraud. If convicted, he could face significant fines and possibly prison time." Rosa felt relief so intense it made her dizzy. "What happens now?" "Thorn has been arrested and is awaiting trial. His lawyer is already trying to negotiate a settlement, which tells me he knows the evidence is strong against him. My recommendation would be to accept a settlement that includes financial compensation for damages, a legally binding agreement not to harass you further, and a formal apology on record. That way you get justice without the uncertainty of a trial." "What do you think?" Rosa asked Zachary. "I think the marshal is right. A settlement gets us everything we need without risking a jury that might be sympathetic to Thorne." He looked at her seriously. "But it is your decision. He poisoned your well and tried to drive you off your land. You have every right to push for a trial if you want one." Rosa thought about the weeks of stress and fear, the back-breaking work to clean her well, the cattle going thirsty in the heat. Then she thought about moving forward, about building a future instead of dwelling on revenge. "I will accept a settlement if the terms are strong enough," she told the marshal. "But I want it in writing and legally enforceable. If Thorne ever comes near my property again, I want grounds for immediate legal action." "I will make sure the agreement reflects that," Marshal Clayton promised. "You should have resolution within the week." True to his word, the settlement was finalized 5 days later. Thorne paid damages totaling $300, signed a legally binding non-harassment agreement, and issued a formal apology on the county records. The money was more than enough to cover Rosa's losses and make improvements to her ranch that she had been postponing for lack of funds. The day after the settlement was finalized, Rosa stood on her own porch looking out at her land and felt something settle inside her. The crisis was over, her ranch was safe, and she had emerged stronger for the fight. Zachary rode up that afternoon, and she knew from his expression that he remembered their conversation on his porch. Her promise to give him a real answer when the trouble was over. "It has been 2 weeks since we talked," he said without preamble. "Enough time for things to calm down and for feelings to settle. So I am asking again, Rosa, will you consider combining our lives, whether as business partners or as something more?" She had thought about little else during those 2 weeks, turning the question over from every angle. Life alone was hard, but it was also lonely. She had proven she could survive without help, but the past weeks with Zachary had shown her that surviving and truly living were different things. "I want something more," she said, her heart beating fast. "I want a partnership in every sense. Business and life, shared decisions and shared work. But I need to know you see me as an equal, not as someone who needs taking care of." "Rosa, I have seen you face down Marcus Thorne with a rifle, spend 2 days in a contaminated well cleaning it by hand, and run a ranch successfully despite every obstacle. I would be a fool to see you as anything but an equal." He stepped closer. "What I am proposing is a joining of equals who make each other stronger. Your land and mine together, your cattle and mine together, our lives and futures together. Married if you will have me, with full partnership in everything." "Married," she repeated, tasting the word. "That is a big step." "It is. But I am certain, Rosa, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness, your determination and your kindness. I love how you make me want to be better, how you challenge me without diminishing me. I want to spend my life with you, building something that lasts." He took her hands carefully. "But only if you want the same. I will not push you into anything you are not ready for." She looked at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers equally work-worn. Hands that had built separate lives and could build something better together. She thought about lonely evenings and difficult decisions made in isolation, then thought about partnership and conversation and shared burdens. "I love you too," she said, and watched his expression transform with joy. "And yes, I will marry you. I want to build a life together, as equals and partners." He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and then deeper as she responded. It felt like coming home and striking out for new territory all at once, familiar and thrilling and exactly right. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Marfa, with Marshal Clayton serving as one witness and the general store owner's wife as the other. Rosa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Zachary wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable in its formality. But when they said their vows, his voice was steady and sure, and she felt her own certainty echo in her words. The months that followed were the happiest of Rosa's life. They combined their ranches officially, filing the paperwork to merge their land into a single large property. Zachary moved into her house, which was slightly bigger than his, and they spent the fall making improvements and repairs. He expanded the barn while she fenced new pastures, and they worked together to rebuild her well's stone rim with stronger materials. Their cattle thrived on the combined grazing land, and they bought additional breeding stock with the settlement money from Thorne. By winter, they had 140 head total, making theirs one of the more prosperous ranches in the area. Marcus Thorne kept to his agreement and stayed away, though Rosa heard through town gossip that he had sold significant portions of his land and moved his primary residence to El Paso. The knowledge that he was gone, truly gone from her life, lifted a weight she had not realized she still carried. The physical side of their marriage developed slowly, both of them feeling their way toward intimacy. On their wedding night, Zachary had been patient and careful, taking time to learn what brought her pleasure and encouraging her to explore what she wanted. Rosa had been nervous at first, her limited experience making her uncertain, but his gentleness and clear enjoyment of her pleasure helped her relax. They learned each other through trial and happy error, and Rosa discovered that she enjoyed the closeness and vulnerability of physical intimacy more than she had expected. The first time Zachary saw her completely vulnerable and emotional, crying over a letter from an old friend announcing her father's death, he had simply held her and let her grieve. The first time she saw him break down, after a difficult day when they lost a cow to a difficult birth, she offered the same comfort. They learned they could be weak with each other without losing respect, that true partnership meant carrying each other's burdens when necessary. Their first real argument came in November, over whether to invest in new breeding bulls or save the money for expansion. It escalated into raised voices and hurt feelings, and Rosa stormed out to work her frustration off mending fence. When she returned hours later, Zachary was waiting with apologies and willingness to compromise. They talked through their positions calmly and found a middle ground that satisfied them both, and the making up afterward was sweet and passionate. By spring, they had settled into rhythms that felt natural and permanent. Morning coffee shared on the porch while planning the day's work, afternoons spent in companionable labor, evenings talking about everything and nothing. Rosa found herself laughing more than she had in years, her natural seriousness balanced by Zachary's dry humor and patient nature. In April, she realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week before mentioning it to Zachary, afraid to hope, but when she finally told him, his joy was so pure and immediate that it swept away her fears. "A baby," he said, his hands hovering over her still flat stomach as if afraid to touch. "We are going to have a baby. We are. If everything goes well." She covered his hands with her own, pressing them against her abdomen. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, yes, but happy beyond measure. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "We are going to be parents, Rosa. We are going to raise a child together on this land we built." The pregnancy was relatively easy despite the physical demands of ranch work. Rosa continued working through her first trimester, though Zachary became increasingly protective and insisted on handling the heaviest tasks. They hired a young cowhand named Tom to help with the summer work, giving Rosa time to rest as she grew larger. In December, with the first winter cold settling over the land, Rosa went into labor. Zachary rode for the midwife in town, while Rosa gripped the bedpost and breathed through contractions that felt like they would split her apart. The midwife arrived with her assistant, and for the next 14 hours, Rosa labored to bring their child into the world. Zachary stayed with her despite the midwife's protests that birth was women's work. He held Rosa's hand through the worst contractions, wiped her face with cool cloths, and whispered encouragement when she was certain she could not continue. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Zachary cut the cord with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the midwife announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in soft blankets. "Healthy and strong." Rosa held her son for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would probably settle to brown like his father's. Zachary knelt beside the bed, one hand touching the baby's tiny fist, his expression full of wonder. "What should we name him?" Rosa asked softly. "What about Samuel after your father, Samuel Quinn?" Zachary looked at her for confirmation. "Unless you had something else in mind." "Samuel is perfect." She watched her son's face scrunch up in sleep and felt tears prick her eyes. "Samuel Quinn, welcome to your family." The weeks after Samuel's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Rosa healed slowly while learning to nurse and care for an infant who seemed to need constant attention. Zachary proved surprisingly adept with the baby, walking him through night crying and changing diapers without complaint. They took turns with the nighttime feedings, and Rosa fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him gentle their son to sleep. Tom handled most of the ranch work during those first months, with Zachary helping when Samuel was sleeping. It was a challenging time financially, with the cost of extra labor and Rosa unable to contribute as much physically. But they managed through careful budgeting, and the money they had saved from the previous year's cattle sales. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, toddling around the house on unsteady legs and babbling nonsense, Rosa felt her life was more complete than she had ever imagined possible. She had her land, her partnership with Zachary, and now their son. The ranch prospered, their cattle herd growing to nearly 200 head, making them one of the largest operations in the area. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised her with a gift he had been working on in secret. A new sign for their ranch gate, beautifully carved and painted, reading Quinn Ranch ESD. 1882, Rosa and Zachary Quinn, proprietors. "Partners in everything," he said as they hung it together. "Your name equal to mine because this ranch would not exist without both of us." Rosa kissed him there by the gate, with Samuel playing in the dirt nearby and the afternoon sun warm on their faces. 3 years ago, she had been alone and fighting for survival. Now she had a family, a thriving business, and a future bright with promise. When Samuel was 2, Rosa discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less afraid, confident in her body's ability and in the partnership she and Zachary had built. Their daughter was born the following spring, an easier birth than Samuel's, and they named her Clara after Zachary's mother. Clara proved different from her brother in every way. Where Samuel had been serious and quiet, Clara was loud and demanding, wanting constant attention and entertainment. She had Rosa's coloring, lighter hair and hazel eyes, and Zachary's stubborn determination. Raising 2 children while running a ranch was challenging, but they adapted. Tom became their foreman, hiring additional help during busy seasons, and Rosa managed the books and breeding programs while caring for the children. Zachary handled the physical work and training of new horses they had begun raising as a side business. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Samuel grew tall and serious, showing early aptitude for handling horses. Clara was fearless and clever, always getting into trouble and talking her way out of it. Rosa watched her children grow and felt grateful every day for the life she had built with Zachary. They expanded the ranch gradually, buying adjacent parcels as they became available. The house was expanded too, adding rooms for the growing family and a proper office for managing the increasingly complex business. By their 10th anniversary, Quinn Ranch was one of the most successful operations in West Texas, known for quality cattle and well-trained horses. Rosa never forgot the lessons of those early days, the poisoned well and the fight to keep her land. She made sure her children understood the value of what they had, that it came from hard work and determination, and refusing to back down from challenges. Samuel and Clara grew up confident and capable, taught by both parents to handle any task the ranch required. On a warm evening in June, 23 years after Rosa first found her well poisoned, she sat on the porch with Zachary and watched the sun set over their land. Samuel was married now, running the horse breeding program with his wife. Clara was engaged to Tom's son, planning a fall wedding. The ranch employed 15 hands and ran nearly 1,000 head of cattle across land that stretched as far as the eye could see. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked quietly, his hand finding hers as it always did. "Agreeing to marry me instead of staying independent." Rosa thought about the scared, lonely woman she had been, fighting alone against forces that wanted to destroy her. Thought about the woman she had become through partnership and love, stronger for having someone to lean on and someone who leaned on her in return. "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me water when mine was poisoned, and you stayed to help fix what was broken. But more than that, you saw me as an equal when most men would have seen someone to control or protect. You helped me become more than I was alone, and I hope I did the same for you. You did. You do." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same gentleness he had shown from the beginning. "I love you, Rosa Quinn. I have loved you since I watched you descend into a poisoned well because your cattle needed water. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, always." She leaned into his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. "We built something good here, Zachary, something that will last." They sat together as the stars emerged, comfortable in the silence of long partnership. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new work, but they would face it together as they had faced everything for over 2 decades. Partners in every sense, stronger together than they had ever been apart. The well that had nearly destroyed Rosa's dreams had instead brought her everything she had never known to hope for. Love, partnership, family, and a legacy that would continue through her children and their children after them. The land her father had claimed was now a thriving ranch that bore her name alongside her husband's, proof that strength and stubbornness, and refusing to give up, could build something magnificent. As they went inside to sleep, Rosa paused to look back at the land spread out under starlight. Her land, their children's land, protected and prosperous and built on a foundation of shared water during a time of drought. She smiled and followed Zachary inside, closing the door on another day of the life they had built together. 3 years later, Rosa sat in a rocking chair on that same porch, cradling her first grandchild. Samuel's son, named Zachary after his grandfather, dozed in her arms while the afternoon heat pressed down on the land. Inside, 3 generations of family gathered for Sunday dinner, voices and laughter spilling through the open windows. Zachary emerged with 2 glasses of cold tea and settled into the chair beside her. At 52, he was graying at the temples but still strong from daily ranch work. Rosa had aged as well, lines around her eyes and silver threading through her hair, but she felt more vital than she had at 24, strengthened by a life of purpose and love. "He looks like Samuel did at that age," Zachary observed, touching his grandson's tiny fist. "Same serious expression, even in sleep. Clara is expecting again," Rosa said. "She told me this morning, due in the spring. Another grandchild. We are growing quite the dynasty here." His tone was light but proud. "Your father would be pleased, I think, to see what you built from what he started." "We built," she corrected gently, "as she had been doing for 26 years. I could not have done any of this alone, Zachary. I know that now." He squeezed her free hand. "But you could have if necessary. That is what I love most about you. You had the strength to stand alone, which makes your choice to stand with me mean everything." Inside, Clara called that dinner was ready. Rosa carefully transferred the sleeping baby to Zachary's arms and watched her husband cradle their grandson with practiced ease. The scene felt right and complete, the natural progression of the life they had built from crisis and shared water. As they gathered around the extended table, 3 generations of family passing food and sharing stories, Rosa felt a contentment so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had fought for without knowing it during those desperate days with a poisoned well. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but this collection of people bound together by blood and love, continuing something that would outlast all of them. Zachary caught her eye across the table and smiled, understanding everything she felt without words. 26 years of partnership had given them that, the ability to communicate in glances and touches what others needed paragraphs to express. She smiled back, her heart full, and raised her glass in a silent toast to the cowboy who had shared his water and then his life, making her dreams larger than she had ever imagined possible. The rest of the meal passed in warmth and good cheer, and when evening came and the family dispersed to their own homes, Rosa and Zachary stood together by the gate with its carved sign. The ranch stretched around them in all directions, land they had built together from separate struggling properties into something strong and lasting. "Satisfied?" Zachary asked, his arm around her waist. Rosa leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him and the land they had shaped together. "More than I ever thought possible. You gave me everything, Zachary, not by saving me but by standing with me while I saved myself." "We saved each other," he said firmly. "And we built this together, every fence post and every decision. That is what partnership means." They walked back to the house as the sun completed its descent, casting long shadows across land that would pass to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of determination and shared strength. The well that had nearly destroyed everything instead had become the foundation of a love story and a family empire, proof that the worst moments can become the catalyst for the best things in life. That night, lying in bed with Zachary's steady breathing beside her, Rosa thought about the terrified woman who had found brown water in her well 26 years ago. She wanted to tell that woman that everything would work out better than she could imagine, that the cowboy who shared his water would become the love of her life, that they would build something magnificent together. But that woman had to walk her own path, make her own choices, and find her own strength before she could accept partnership without losing herself. Rosa understood that now. The trials had been necessary. The struggle had been required, because without them, she would never have appreciated what she gained or understood her own worth. She reached across the bed to touch Zachary's shoulder, needing the physical reassurance of his presence. He stirred slightly, and his hand found hers automatically, even in sleep. 26 years, and the touch still brought comfort and connection, still made her feel less alone in the world. The last thing Rosa thought before sleep claimed her was gratitude. Gratitude for poisoned water that brought help, for a decent man who saw her as an equal, for children and grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward, and for a love that had grown from crisis into something unshakable and permanent. It was more than enough. It was everything.